Those of you who, like me, had a teddy when small, can look on this tale with belief. And those who've not cherished a teddy at all, well, regard it as mere light relief. Because this tells of a teddy's responding to need by some enchantment bestowed on him. When the call came for action, he'd acted indeed. So who knows, could it happen again? Though as bomber crew mascot, a charmed life he'd led, when the squadron moved, he was forgotten, not loved or even known, but imprisoned instead in an old cupboard. Wasn't that rotten? Now, for those who don't know, from the start of that show, some girl flyers like Bunny and Hillary, with chaps who for some reason to war couldn't go, had joined the Air Transport Auxilliary. Girls whose adventures the men had surprised, who'd been flying for daring and fun, now the ranks of the ferrying service comprised. The famed Amy Johnson, for one. Ferrying planes, all sorts, all in a rush, was now these young ladies' vocation. Currently, new Spitfires, all very hush-hush, to the latest defence base location. It happened that Wendlebury, not now operational, was a useful pick-up point en route to catch transport back, but for which an occasional overnight stay had to suit. On these trips, their digs were a bit disorganised, causing sometimes an awkward hiatus. Admin at girl pilots were somewhat surprised. It was partly a problem of status. As ATA crew girls were oddly positioned, things were still a bit nebulous then. They weren't in the forces, ORs or commissioned, were pilots, weren't WAFs and weren't men. They'd make do with storerooms to stay overnight. Not too clean and distinctively breezy, but it's somewhere to sleep. They'd be off at first light. Yet Bunny felt somewhat uneasy. Some form of nightwear they'd tried to arrange, and not all the doors always had locks on, but as fighters lacked room for an overnight change, she now had little more than her socks on. She'd need more than that or she'd be frozen through, but you can't be too fussy in war. These old overalls as pyjamas might do. And it was at that moment she saw something for which she was totally unready, and Dance nearly gave her heart failure. Staring up at her, some forlorn, dusty old teddy, if you please, in full flying regalia. She laughed at herself, was composed in a trice, stooped and picked him up out of the muddle, said, "There's something about you, Teddy, you're rather nice. In fact, you'll be something to cuddle." So she took him to bed and went sound off to sleep, after saying, while stretching and yawning, "If I tidy you up, you'd be quite nice to keep." So she asked all around in the morning. "Hello, we're ATA and we'll be back and forth over the next couple of days. While we're here, I could clean up this bear between trips from the north and darn him and wash out his gear." If he's something that somebody won't want to part with, I understand that. I don't blame him. But I'm hoping to ask round who owns him to start with, and if nobody does, I could claim him. "He's a stranger to me, I've not seen him about. Someone's taken some trouble. Perhaps as he's all set for flying and well kitted out, he belonged to those Lancaster chaps." "Hey, that's funny, but there is some legend or myth about a teddy who flew with some bloke." "Yes, I heard about that. It's a tale of no pith. No legend, just some sort of joke." Well, it seemed pretty obvious nobody knew him, so it must be okay in that case for Bunny to take him in hand. So she flew him back up in the Anson to base. They were now bringing in the last plane for delivery. She'd laundered and mended and sewn. He was perched there, resplendent in full flying livery, and now she could call him her own. The news at the tower wasn't sounding too good. "It seems there's some straggling jerrys, heading southeast and nearing here, it's understood. Hope they don't cotton onto those ferries."
Mlford Tower, Blue 1. Permission to land?
Blue 1, negative. Jerry's abroad. Coming in from northwest of here, we understand.
Mlford Tower, Blue 1. Roger.
Oh, God. Suggest you turn port and head off northeast till we're rid of them. We'll call you up when they've gone.
Blue section, Wilco. Hillary, did you get that? I did, I'm afraid. Okay, that's it. Come on.
Now then, Mr. Ted, don't just sit there and stare like some stuff brewing in a museum. We must keep our eyes open and look everywhere, and you just let me know if you see 'em. Whoops. Du Klaus, ich habe echt Angst gehabt, als wir per Flug gekommen sind, said Hans. Aber das sag ich dir. Der Pilot da sah mehr aus wie ein Kind. Which to all German speakers is clear. But means, Hans said to Klaus, when we came on this force, I tell you, I had some fits of anxiety, but, rough translation of course, there's some soft-looking blokes flying spits. She pitched into a dive as they caught the first shot from the enemy's scattering burst. But her speed of reaction, by instinct or what, meant they'd likely avoided the worst. She saw with relief that they weren't turning back. Looked like two Junkers 88As. But the hits they had scored still painted things black, as the scene round the cockpit conveys. The glycol tank sprayed and the windscreen was darkened. The engine was coughing out smoke. Down there were some houses, some trees and a park, and, taking up Teddy, she spoke. Someone must stay in to get this thing landed, and that someone has got to be me. Better you leave, just about to be candid. With some luck you'll land in a tree. Here, have my slip, my best silk slip, mind you. As a chute it might help break your fall. I'll come back and search around later to find you. That's if I make it at all. Ted goes over the side as off the kite veers, and he thinks to himself, as you would falling 800 feet with a slip round your ears, this next bit had better be good. Apart from lost bits of hair, a few cuts and a tear, he'd emerged from the ordeal scot-free. But must he now forever stay dangling there, from some underwear up in a tree? The voices he heard coming up from below therefore came as a pleasant surprise. "I can't make it out yet, a bit further to go," said a fairly small girl with blue eyes. To give her due, a climb to that height for a small girl must be a bit heady. She called out, "Louise, I can reach it all right." "Oh, look, it's an RAF Teddy." He was soon sat at tea with a plate and a cup, and the girls were well-meaning and kind, but this stuff about, "Now, Teddy, eat it all up," well, you thought he'd left all that behind. Had it not been for her, he'd have never been found, so his hostess he must try to please. That's what Teddies are for, he's at least on the ground, and that's better than dangling in trees. There was one awkward moment on one listless day when they sat a bit bored in the garden. She said, "You think of something, Ted, you'd like to play." And he felt himself turn and say, "Pardon?" The next day, the fun ended, alas and alack, when Daddy appeared on the scene. "Looks like an Air Force mascot, we'd best give him back. Besides, we don't know where he's been." "Oh, Daddy, we do. He's our friend. He likes buns. And, well, pilots need rest, and we're treating him ever so well, and he spoke to us once. But he is a bit messy at eating." So, of course, she was sad when, next morning at 8, Daddy drove up and said, with a wink to the puzzled SP standing guard by the gate, "You've lost one of your flyers, I think." At RAF Mlford St Giles, he's bound to look odd with the guardroom's SPs. "Shall I keep him with me till his owner's been found?" asked the naffy girl. "Yes, if you would, please." Well, serving nosh to the lads, they went all round the station, eventually stopping the van by the huts at dispersal, where, with snatched relaxation, B-Flight were waiting at standby. "New bear friend, then?" asked a mech over cakes and a mug, always trying to make her blush and confuse her. "I look after him and sometimes I give him a hug. After all, he's a pilot, like you, sir." "Ah, angel of sweet Epicurean delight, in your winged cornucopian booth, please allow Ted to join us poor souls in B-Flight." Well, how could she refuse one so smooth? So, with B-Flight he stayed at their dispersal hut, and was there in the company all day of both ground crew and pilots. They patted his nut, just for luck. They were matey that way. There were raiders about. This was one of those days with nearly all kites in the air. The only ones left were in bits in the bays, or out on the strip for repair. Ted was sat in the cockpit as fate had decreed, on an engine test that afternoon, Amidst the vital equipment all engine mechs need, a jam tart, mug of tea and a spoon. From the tannoy, about 10 ME-109s, coming in from the west, fast and low. It's a strafe. Of the pilotless planes stood in lines, his was one of those ready to go. All flying personnel alert, no time to waste. Take up any spare kite that will start. The mechanic leapt off, snatching up in his haste mug and spoon, but not Ted and jam tart. His was the last plane, the one pilot remaining, still unfit from a parachute fall, approaching the kite, badly limping and straining, saw it wasn't unmanned after all. The alarm bell commands vehicles out to the loop, and the ambulance and fire trucks make off. The controller demands, "Put me straight through to group." And who the hell's that there at takeoff? Ted taxied, not knowing which way was the runway, and he knew the runway was a long way, and the way a plane tended to run away one way. But he came on the runway the wrong way. Well, he'd got off the ground without too much to spare, and of course it was very exciting. And better try out the aircraft as far as he dare. He could get caught up in the fighting. Still flying low, he wobbled and bucked. The CO and his wife by his side, to avoid a decapitation, both ducked, as "Who on earth's that, John?" she cried. Better just steady up and fly on straight and level, and get the clock well above zero. Daft crashes will not make a flying daredevil, nor killing group captains a hero. When some of the fellows had girls near the drones or somebody else they were close to, they used to dive down and swoop over their homes, although they weren't really supposed to. Anyway, this was combat. He'd not got all day, and there's not endless fuel to burn. Since the Spitfire might have an advantage that way, perhaps he should try a tight turn. Now, positive G's drain the blood from the head, and negative cause it to flood. But that sort of thing didn't happen with Ted, for sawdust is thicker than blood. So, if he weren't a Teddy, such greater expanse of manoeuvre his form would forbid, and he couldn't fly round by the seat of his pants. But he was, and he could, so he did. Having got lost in cloud, he'd better, thought Ted, get his bearings by scanning the ground. He finally spotted it over his head, which means he should just roll it round, that's it. Popping up above cloud, he was quite pleased to find he'd joined up with some others. Then things became odd as he saw, as he closed from behind, they were all marked with crosses, not rings. He'd joined a formation of enemy kites. They'd not seen him, so dare he aspire to move within range and then line up his sights? That's it, left a bit, up a bit, and nothing. The firing button's catch was on safety, so first he sorted that out with a flick. A flick! Then he lined up again, gave a 3-second burst, saw the hit and dived out of it quick. Ted at this turn of events was delighted, and the airfield was not far away. Some muck on his windscreen made him mostly unsighted. He got down, but in some disarray. The events and the bounce left him tired and dazed. Then, by one of the chaps on the bowsers, he was firmly, but gently, all lifeless and glazed, lifted out by the seat of his trousers. No one could work out who had flown in D-Dog. The film had been run. Looking through it, the intelligence officer said, "It's all there in the log. The damn thing's been up, but who flew it?" One obvious kill, stuck there half in the ground. For a formal report, not for my sake, must accredit a pilot with no one around. I can't put down a Teddy for Christ's sake. And remember, the RT's for minimum use, so a lot less of this interplane yak. And lastly, the subject of screws getting loose. It seems there's among us some maniac who'll take teddy bears out for company, or worse'll take one up with him. Now this is something we can't have, soft toys at dispersal. That quite clear? Right, that's all. Dismiss. The radio's voice is awaited. the cues of the three little signals preceding it. This is the BBC Home Service, here is the news, and this is Alvin Mardell reading it. More fighting today when the enemy mounted a 100-strong airborne attack, of which victories by fighter command planes accounted for 20. The rest were turned back. The RAF's losses were 8, we have learned, though the whereabouts of 2 are unknown, that 5 of the pilots have safely returned, and 1 Spitfire came back on its own. The refuelers had known that the Bear was alone. There was also the IO's report, and the NAFI girls saying the Bear must have flown. Unless her eyes or her mind were at fault. Ted's reputation and stature had grown as the stories passed on, first with smiles and then puzzled interest, as Ted became known as the Phantom of Milford St Giles. This myth in the making the landlord thought fine, for his pub it had reached on the breeze. So he renamed the pub with a bear on the sign, and felt it was quite a good wheeze. This teddy bear jake that they're trying to flog, it's quite likely a fox or a stoat, or a bat or a frog, or a rat or a hog, or a cat or a dog, or a goat. Oh, there he is, he's mentioned here in dispatches from that ATA girl who crash-landed, said the Adge. Bad luck, I suppose, but the catch is, they're often a little cack-handed. He showed Pilot Officer Page, who had been the pilot approaching the kite, though unfit, when the scramble was called, and had seen the unknown aviator take flight. Dear Flight Lieutenant Brooke, you may recall me, and by now you'll have seen the reports. I got shot up and, after pruning a tree or two, managed a landing of sorts. I was dazed. I remember, or imagined, some sheep running past. Then blacked out. After what seemed an age, I woke up to fame, a heroine at last. It was all in the papers, front page. Anyway, I was laid up for over a week. Now I'm okay and feeling much better. It's a favour to do with a teddy I seek, and that's really the point of this letter. Could you keep an eye out for the teddy I ditched when the Spit started going US, if he turns up? I know it sounds daft or bewitched, but I'm fond of him, as you might guess. We all need a friend when alone in the sky, and he is the right one to take. If you find him, please keep him until I come by. Sincerely yours, Bunny Blake. Well, if you're going to be claimed, you'd better be ready. I'm not operational quite yet, just domestic hops, so if you're inspirational, Teddy, I could use all the help I can get. On the apron, an aircraft awaits with a spare for USAAF rise landing. Near the kite, with her back to them, as yet unaware, a lady ATA pilot is standing. If you're Miss Blake, we heard you might be looking for someone. Why, yes. Pilot Officer Page, Jim. If it's this little fellow, you're in luck. He's become one of us. Yes, that's Teddy. That's him. Bunny was delighted to see him once more. Can I have him back? Is it all right? Should be, but for courtesy, just to make sure, better check with them over at flight. Thanks, said Bunny. I'll do it now. See you again. And rushed off to the hut all a-dither. P.O. Page turned round and jumped in the plane, assuming she'd taken Ted with her. Such misunderstandings will often prevail to change events as they now do, and the aircraft with Ted so far still on the tail will soon be just a speck in the blue. And thus Ted, who'd been talked about all round the place and whose legend extended for miles, disappeared from the area, leaving no trace of the Phantom of Milford St Giles. Well, nothing substantial, that is to say, except for a picture one chap took of some blokes round a kite later many a day he would point to when showing his scrapbook. I know it's absurd, but if you look just there, in the background, behind that chap's hat, it's all fuzzy and blurred, but it looks like a bear. Bloody strange photograph, that.